Hey there everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of the Wizard Builds. In this video we're going to be talking about all the skill runes. Now this video is very much for the current time in the game. If you're watching this video at a later date, then I may have brought out a new video going through the skill runes, because more skill runes will come out over time and the best ones are going to change over time. So yeah, I plan to make updated versions of this video at a later date. So if you are watching this later time, do make sure that, just disregard this video and watch the next one. But if you're watching this and there isn't another one, then you're in the right place. So just to a slight apology first about the previous videos that I was bringing out. I'm using a new screen recorder, as well as just the way I'm setting things up is slightly different. So there's a bit of background buzz, a bit of lag with the game and stuff. I'm sorry for this. I'm just still getting used to the new recording stuff. So I'll try my best to make sure I don't have these problems. Done a few tests before this video, so there should be less background buzz. But yeah, anyway, going forward, everything should be a lot better. That's my hope. So in this video, we're going to be going through all the stuff to do with skill runes. This one is going to be long, but not as long as the last video. That was over an hour, and I didn't actually say in the video, but there are loads of useful links in the description to get to particular points. Again, exactly the same thing for this video. If you want to see particular bits, then there are links in the description. So do use those. Again, also make sure you can read this text, because again, it's going to be similar presentation style going through things, just because it makes things a lot easier on my end. And actually, I think for your end, taking in the information, if you can read it there on the screen and not just follow my, my words. So I haven't actually written a plan for this video in terms of what order we're going through things, so you're just going to have to go with me for this. But to begin with, I wanted to mention the gold find skill runes. So one of the first things I always get asked to do about skill runes, and it's just always being asked in the community, is people hear that there are gold find skill runes in the game, and they want to know what they are, how they can get them and stuff, because gold is so important. So there are some gold find skill runes in the game, however only one is actually possible to obtain. So anyway, you could read what I'm writing here, but actually there is a thread on the forum called Gold Find Skill Runes, which is where someone literally was asking about gold find skill runes, and as you can see, I've given a post. I'm going to keep this updated as more get added into the game. So again, if you're watching this at a later time and stuff, do check this out rather than following exactly what I'm saying in this video, because there may be some which you can get, which I say you can't get in this video because they don't exist yet. So anyway, this shows it for each class as well. Go through Wizard first of all, because that's actually the class I play, so it's just typically what I do first. So anyway, there are 5 in the game, however only 1 can actually be obtained. So the other 4, they were basically released in festivals. Either you had to spend some money and then you got the skill rune, or you had to do some other requirement and you got the skill rune. So you can't actually get them now. They're just available. They were available to other people in the past. So don't stress out over them too much, because actually that you've got brilliant access to gold find in other places, which actually those people playing back then didn't have. So anyway, the important one to take note of for Wizard is Greater Fire Burst. So actually for this skill rune, it is possible to get this by evolving Fire Burst. I'm actually going to show this in game. Normally I'm leaving notes in the in that note to sort of tell myself what I'm going to be doing in this video. But anyway, I'm actually going to show this in the game. So Fire Burst is this skill rune. You can get it very easily in various places. You can get it very early on in the game, and then what you do is, if we just level this up, so as you can see, it starts at fine quality level 1. You don't see any gold find on it. There's no obvious thing about it, but actually what you can do is you can level this up to max level, and then you can evolve it into a new skill rune, which gets the gold find on, and then you can keep leveling it up. So it's one of the few skill runes which can do this in the game, and I'm going to show this here. If I level this up, you can see it's superior quality now. I'll keep going, and then it becomes it will become epic quality. Goes through the legendary levels, and then it doesn't actually take too much experience to level this up. However, when it turns into the gold find version, it's going to cost a lot of experience to level up. So as you can see here, this is a very unique case. There's only a few skill runes in the game which can do this. and this is the only one which turns into a gold find skill rune. However, you can see here it's a max level 5 legendary rune, and then it will evolve into a new one, a greater fire burst from fire burst at fine quality. It's a very weird mechanic, and they added it in. I think they wanted to kind of do more with it, but then they just decided not to. So anyway, it's called skill rune legendary evolution as a mechanic, and as you can see, you get 5% gold find on this. You evolve it, and then it becomes this fine quality one, and then you can level that up, and it will get more gold find on it. So you can see now it's 9% and stuff. Most of it actually comes in the legendary quality, so you don't get that much to begin with. You can see it's only at 19% right now. At Epic now it's 25. Anyway, basically I won't go all the way through it, but that is the gold find skill rune that you can get. Anyone can get it, and I would recommend grabbing it as soon as you can, and as soon as you can kind of put aside that experience for it. A lot of people in these games and stuff, and myself included, will focus like entirely on that utility kind of stats, the gold find and everything, before they do any combat stuff, just because they want to set themselves up for the long run. So if you want to do that, then go with the gold find skill rune as soon as you can. Otherwise, maybe get some combat stuff first and then get the gold find skill rune. I won't really give you any recommendation on that, it's totally up to you. But anyway, so the thing that I wanted to note to do with that is that the experience requirements are very high for it. So that's why you may want to put it off to a bit later. And in fact, this is my skill runes guide on the forum, which is it's basically got a load of numbers and stats and stuff on the first page, and then the other pages are unfinished and out of date. So don't go reading it and like taking stuff from it. This video is basically my replacement for this guide. It's a very bad, outdated guide, and one of my biggest regrets, because I really wanted to do this guide properly. But anyway, on this first page, I have got some useful bits of information, like the leveling requirements. I haven't included all the different types of jewels here, skill runes, but just to kind of illustrate, most skill runes that you're going to be leveling up are going to be either D category. Oh, sorry, I'm not selecting very well, but either D category or E category. So they're going to take about this much experience to get to max, or this much. So 170,000 or 260,000. Now the gold find skill rune, first of all, you've got to get it through this B category, and then it turns into a C version. So it's basically going to cost you 460,000 in total to do, which is quite a bit more than other skill runes to max. However, it gets you 75% gold find, and then that's going to give you a huge benefit, maybe more benefit than like 2 or 3 skill runes would give you. It's up to you. But I just wanted to highlight it before, in case anyone started investing it and then going like, wow, this is taking forever to level up. But anyway, so that's how much you can kind of expect to do on skill runes. Personally, I find each one, when you're doing ones that take 170,000 or 260,000, they take about a month to finish. That's roughly what I found, or a few weeks if you're pushing hard and stuff. But you can expect each skill rune to take quite a bit of an investment to level up. So moving back to my presentation. So gone through gold find skill runes. I hope that's clear enough. Do check out that forum thread if you want to read how they were got. There's different skill runes and all that kind of stuff. Basically, there's just that one you gotta know about. The experience requirements, we've shown them. Had a quick look at them. The next section is basically. Oh no, we got one more bit. So one thing which I get asked a lot is kind of what is the best elemental build to go with. You're going to really be able to answer this question a lot better once I've gone through some of the theory, but I wanted to hit it first of all and basically say that right now, fire and nature are the best elements. However, when I say they're the best elements, it's them in combination, because every single element right now on the wizard class has some kind of missing skills or gaps in it. And so really what you need is 2 elements in order to get the best out of your skills, because there'll be certain ones which you just can't use in certain elements and that kind of stuff. So fire and nature is the best combination. However, then there's also water and shadow, which work well as supporting elements. So you could go with like one of fire or nature and then water or shadow. Depends a bit on the combination. It's a bit complicated to go into right now. But basically, the reason why these are good supporting elements is Shadow has a lot of skill runes for skills which are very strong, and as well as how to put it. So in the previous video, I split the different skills into primary damage skills, secondary damage skills, and minor damage skills. So what you really want to look at is the primary damage skills and the secondary damage skills. Now Shadow doesn't really have any of the secondary stuff, but it has practically all the primary stuff. Meanwhile, Water, Fire and Nature, these all have the secondary stuff and not so much the primary stuff. So Shadow works quite well with one of the other elements, as well as then Water works well because it has Master of Ice, so it's just always a solid element. Master of Ice boosts your Water by 200%. So it's kind of great to have if you're quite newish to the game and say you just boost your Fire and then you can also boost your Water with Master of Ice. Then that actually covers a lot of the skills on the class. So you can do very well just going with those two elements. So yeah, that's how kind of builds can work, and elemental builds, I mean. But Fire and Nature are the two best elements, and then them in combination is just absolutely brilliant. So yeah, anyway, that's sort of elements in general. But what we're going to go into now is each of the skills. Sorry, excuse me, I've got a bit of a sore throat. My voice is working right now, so I'm happy. I was a little bit worried before starting this video. Okay, so what we have here are the skills in the game. All the different wizard skills. I'm excluding the advanced skills because they don't really have fleshed out skill runes right now. The current ones are just no good at all, so to be honest, there's no worth evaluating them. It's better just to wait until they've got better skill runes for them. You could do it for the other classes, I think, maybe, but not for wizard. So what we're looking at now is every single one of the base skills and what skills are best for them and that kind of stuff. This, I was kind of wanting to show it in game, and then I thought, no, actually, this is probably the best way to look at it, and because I can have it all on screen at the same time, so you can look at the bits which you want to. Maybe pause the video and look at bits. I'm going to explain what we're looking at and then go through some of the details, but I'm not going to go through this in full because you can look at the bits which interest you. So obviously we got the names of them. You can see I go through them in order, so if you want to find a particular one, you know which one the skill is. It's Archmage first, Archmage last, and Arcane Ball first. The next row kind of talks about, it shows the best rune, the best current skill rune for each skill. So these are, taking everything into account, basically the best one for each one. I'll highlight the main particular ones. The elements, this row, what this is talking about is the kind of the damage, the elemental skill runes for each skill that are worthwhile using for damage if you have that kind of build. So basically what I'm saying there is if you take a look at Arcane Ball here, the best one is a water skill rune. However, if you weren't a water build, if you were any of these other builds, even a light build, then there are viable damage options here for those different elements. Meteor Strike here, Arcane Beam here. Meteor Strike, the Fire rune, this one is brilliant. However, actually, you could use, there is a skill rune for every single element here, and because this skill is all about damage and stuff, you could basically use any kind of rune for this skill, depending on whatever build you've picked or whatever kind of content you're going into. So actually, even though Meteor Strike is a lot stronger than the others, you could use any one of these, any element this could work for. So that kind of is talking about that. It's just basically talking about the damage, not talking about anything else. Then what we've got is others. So I've only listed it where there is any other skill rune that's worthwhile, and they're basically for particular utility things. So elements is for the damage, others is for something else. So I'm going to go through these. Element empowered fire blast. Also, I use the shortened version. I call it EMP when it means empowered. So EMP fire blast here. This is just for farming. There are actually other skill runes here which increase the area for farming, but basically you just need one of them, and then you just use it for farming. So empowered fire blast, that's what that's good for. Then burst, we've got the greater fire burst for gold find. We've already talked about that earlier on. That's just another skill rune you may consider leveling up. And then arcane beam, we've got Call of Terror. So if you want to try out the silence in PvP, this is quite a cool extra mechanic thing that you can bring into your PvP. So Call of Terror is for that, and you may want to level that up for that. For Frost Armor, I've talked about Spirit Armor. It's actually Nature's Blessing is basically the same. Spirit Armor just heals by slightly more. So that is that's the one to do. But anyway, so you've got Empowered Flame Armor, or any other one like this. Crystal Armor basically works the same thing, just for farming really. And then Mana Bolts. This is pretty much a PvP skill. However, Avalanche does make it a PvE skill. So if you want to use it as a PvE skill, Avalanche is a great choice for that. So that's the other one there. And as you can see on the rest of them, not a single other skill rune mentioned. So what this does is actually probably a lot more than you first envisioned when you looked at it. There are, if there is a skill rune which isn't listed on here, it is not worth leveling up. That's pretty much how it is. So on Arcane Ball here, we've got quite a few actually worthwhile. We've got Empowered Frozen Sphere. We've then got all these other, elemental ones, one for each of the elements, which basically could be good if you're trying to get some elemental damage of those types. Burst, you can see Icicle Splash is worth leveling up for the longer stun, basically in PvP. It's got a nice area hit as well, does some decent water damage, and as you can see, I've only listed the water damage one. There's basically no point leveling up any of the other ones, except for Greater Fire Burst, obviously, but none of the other ones are worthwhile leveling up. So yeah, if you just go through each of the skills, like, it basically lists, what's actually worthwhile in any way, and what you might want to use it for, and then, yeah, if it's not on there, it's not worthwhile. So I'm not going to go through everything. The only other bits to point out are when I say something like this. So on Frost Armor here, I've said elements none. Now this is because it's not actually worthwhile using this skill for any kind of elemental damage. The Flame Armor and Crystal Armor and stuff, they're going to do some damage, but it's not going to be significant at all. So actually, this is not a significant kind of skill rune that you want to get up to get some damage of that element. It's just not worthwhile. Anything else to mention? Oh yes. So I put a little star next to some of these. I've now got to remember why I put a star next to some of these. Oh yes. It's because their element isn't significant. So no matter what kind of build you go with, you want to get these star ones up, because they're going to improve your build. So if we just go through why, Empowered Frozen Sphere, this one, it's more about the fact that it slows enemies. Not really to do with the damage here, even though it's actually quite decent damage anyway. It's more about that it slows enemy movement and stuff. So even if you had a fire build, if you didn't have any water, you're going to want to level this up and use it anyway. Icicle Splash, exactly the same kind of thing. It's for the longer stun in PvP. It hits a good area and stuff. It's just the best use of Burst. It improves it in the way you want it. So even if you're not water build, you just want to do this one. Spirit Armor here, it's not about the damage at all. Spirit Armor and Nature's Blessing, they don't do any damage really. So even though it's Shadow, you could have, I mean, on my character I literally have 20% Shadow, and I have like 400% on other elements. I use Spirit Armor because it's not about that at all. It's about the extra bonuses. On Drake here, we've got one for Nature Drake. Now this might be confusing, but Drake doesn't use your elemental stats. So actually, you can see here, all these elements are viable on any build. You just basically use whichever one's best for the content, because they don't use your stats. Doesn't matter on your build. Anything else that's starred? Oh yeah, so Fire Blink, Ice Blink. So these are starred because they're, again, for the boost of move speed. Not at all about the damage. I mean, they do a little bit of damage, but it's tiny. So yeah, they're there for the move speed. Doesn't matter about the build. And then Master of Ice here. This one is brilliant for any build because it boosts your water stat by 200%. Now that's just a flat buff off what the skill does. It's very useful, and in fact it's brilliant for things like Empowered Frozen Sphere and Icicle Splash, which you may be using outside of a water build. Master of Ice is going to mean that your water skills do very good damage anyway. So this is brilliant for a skill like Empowered Frozen Sphere to have Master of Ice on your class as well. But if you're not doing a water build and stuff, you may want to leave this to a little bit later. But anyway, so that's pretty much everything you could want to know in one place here. I think I've gone through everything that I wanted to talk about with it. If there's any like slashes like this, it's basically that the screens are pretty much equivalent in terms of damage and that kind of stuff. It's just you go with the one that's the element of what your build is. So that's talking about all the screens, showing them all and stuff. I'm going to show them now in the game, so you can kind of, because these are just names of Skuruns, you may not be able to know exactly what they look like and what they're doing. So I'm going to go through each of them in turn now, just showing what they do and talking about them very briefly. So in Empowered Frozen Sphere here, this one does a bit of extra water damage. It does actually quite a lot of static damage, so this can be good early on. But anyway, its main thing is that it slows enemies for 3 seconds. That's way more than all the other Skuruns. There's only one other Skurun right now which slows, and it slows by a smaller amount. It's like 40% rather than 75%, which is a hidden number, and only for 1.75 seconds as opposed to 3 seconds. So yeah, that's what it's used for, and that's why you'd want to do it. Icicle Splash here, it does some water damage, also creates a little area which continues to do water damage for a few more seconds, which means it actually does more damage than pretty much any other Skurun on the skill, I think. But the main thing is that it stuns for 3 seconds, and if I were to just put on a different Skurun right now, you can see it stuns for 3 seconds. However, then, well, you can't really read here, but it says in PvP it stuns for 2 seconds. So Icicle Splash, the main reason for it is it gets that 3-second stun. 3-second stun in PvP. So that's what that one's doing. Meteor Strike here, this just adds extra damage. It also changes the fear to stun, which is what you want on Arcane Beam Skuruns. But yeah, the damage is just way more than the other Skuruns. I mean, if we just compare it to like Radiant Light here, this is the second most damaging. And that 95% light damage has gone to 110% fire damage. It's a big boost, considering that's the second best. If you go to any other one, it's like, 90% up to 110%. This one, it's like 80% up to 110%. It's just a lot more damage, and that's what this skill is all about. Then Spirit Armor, what this one is doing is it is adding, there is a tiny amount of damage, but like honestly that is just nothing at all. What this is really adding is enemies that hit you get rooted for 1.5 seconds. Actually a very useful ability, especially in PvP. And then also every 5 seconds you heal by a certain amount of your health. The other one, which is very similar to this, is Nature's Blessing, which is pretty much exactly the same, except that the heal is 5,000 plus 11% rather than 5,000 plus 13%. So as you can see, Spirit Armor just does a little bit more healing. That's the only benefit it's got over there. But either one works well. It's a nice little buff to this skill. Drake here, it's adding some nature damage onto each attack that it does, and also some nature damage over the next few seconds. Now this is a little bit more confusing, because this 3,807 that it's doing over the number of seconds, for whatever reason, this particular Skurun actually does a lot more with the static damage than it says. This is not a kind of static damage. If you look at the other ones, like Empowered Frost Drake here, you can see the static damage is 6,663, which is a lot more than the 3,807. However, that 6663, for whatever reason, is just like a static, that amount of damage that it does. However, the Nature Drake's version is more like 100% pet damage. So in fact, what you're getting from the Nature Drake is like 6 extra hits of 100%. So rather than, while the other ones all give like 500% of their element, this is actually adding 1,100% of its element. So that's why Nature Drake stands out way more than the other ones do. But the other ones, they all do work when they're working against, when they're being used against enemies that take more damage from that element. But Nature Drake is just far better in general, and should be the one that you use. For mana bolts here, it's either Flame Cannon or Forest Bolts. If we just look at them side by side, you can see here that if you ignore all the extra detail on Forest Bolts, you just look at the first bit. It's 61% plus 5,000. Compare that to Flame Cannon's 52% plus 15,000. They're roughly similar. It's very similar kind of damage that you're getting from them. You just go with whichever one is better on your build, fire or nature. And yeah, they're the two best damage skills here. The other ones are all just a bit worse. Avalanche here, this does more hits, but it does it over time, which is just worse for PvP, and it's basically not a PvP version, it's a PvE version. So that does more damage. It does 8 hits rather than 6, but it's only for PvE, which is why I said that's another one to get up there, which if you want it. Earthwave or Mana Storm, the other ones are actually all pretty good too, but this is just the one which adds the most damage. The extra effect, it pushes them back when you use it. It's kind of handy, but generally the extra effects on Mana Storm are not that good. It's mainly about the damage, and this one just adds the most amount, the 61% plus 15,000. The next one on Polymorph, so this one is pretty much equivalent to Infected Pig. Both of them are very good. The amount of damage on them, the base skill doesn't do any damage, so the damage they're adding on is literally what's there. Does it every second. It's a huge amount because it's 12 hits of that. And you can see Mad Squirrel's a little bit stronger, but effectively they're roughly the same. So that's what that one's adding. Also, sorry, both those Skurrins, they change the range of this to go from like hitting, I can't remember how many units it is. It's like 400 or something, and it goes up to 1,000. It just increases the range massively, so you're going to have those Skurrins on, that's what they do. Protection Bubble here. Both Fiery Aura and Curse Protection basically do the same. They add an effect that when you get hit, you counter with hits in return, a damage over time of either fire or shadow. As you can see, the damage is basically the same. So that's what they're doing, and that's what these Skurrins add. They're actually very strong as well. But yeah, we'll talk about them more later. Teleport, Fire Blink and Ice Blink. I talked about the move speed buff that you get. You can see here there's a little bit of damage that you get when you use it. It's where you land, which is a bit more awkward. It doesn't really happen, to be honest. It's not about the damage. It's about that 30% move speed bonus for 6 seconds. In PvP, that's actually a 40% bonus. And I personally like Fire Blink more because the stats on Fire Blink itself gives you 3% move speed, which Ice Blink doesn't. So that's just a constant 3% buff. And then when you teleport, you also get the same buff that you get on Ice Blink. And then Healing Fountain. So there are 3 here which pretty much work the same. There's a lot of text on these actually. So Spiritual Circle and Healing Shrine are basically exactly the same. There's just a tiny difference in damage, and then also obviously the element difference. But what they do is they will knock back. They have a chance of knocking back enemies who walk into that, and yeah, they get knocked back a really long way. In PvP, it's a stun, and it's a 2-second stun, so that's actually quite decent. And then you've also got Cleansing Flame, which is the same with the damage, same with the healing bonus, which is something I didn't mention actually. The healing bonus, it gives an extra 20% heal per second, which is just insane. It makes the skill really good. And then the difference between Cleansing Flame and the others is it does a bit more damage. You can see the static damage has increased from 11,000 to 15,000. But then the effect, rather than it being a knockback or a stun in PvP, it's them being slowed. I would say that's a slightly weaker effect, but it makes sense that basically the fire one is a bit more damaging, but then the effect, the extra effect, is a bit weaker. So that's those 3 there and what they're doing for the skill. Arcane Breath here. What Flame Breath's doing, it's very complicated. I've made videos about this before. Basically, it breaks the animation lock and it turns this into a buff. It just does tons of damage to nearby enemies, all around in a circle, even though it just looks like it's in one direction. Just basically slaps a ton of damage onto this skill. That's what it's doing. And then Mimic, we've got 3 Skurrins, which actually, basically all the Skurrins on this skill do the same thing. They just boost the damage of a respective element. Mimic doesn't use your elemental stats, so this is how you kind of make it viable. By you pick the element that you're using, the skills you're using most of, and then it means that those skills that the Mimic's copying just do a bit more damage. So yeah, that's what you're doing there with this. Generally less important, I'd say, but if you're going to be using Mimic, then you know this is how you get some more damage on it. And then Archmage, Master of Ice, I've already talked about this. It boosts your water stat by 200% for that time. Oh, that's something I should say about Mimic actually. A lot of people get confused when they see that the boost in certain stats, and they think it's a boost to their character. It's not a boost to your character. In Archmage, when you use Master of Ice, it boosts it to your character. However, on Mimic, it boosts it to the Mimic's damage. So Mimic doesn't use your elemental stats at all. It's like a separate entity that just uses the skills you use. And then these Skurrins, what they do is they just buff the damage that the Mimic's doing. It doesn't affect your damage at all. So that's going through them all. I hope that makes it a lot clearer about what these different Skurrins are, what they're doing, and why you'd kind of pick them, rather than just this sort of presentation version. So anyway, that's going through all the Skurrins and stuff. We're now going to go through just a little bit more about the elements and maybe an order of what we're going to level up. So I'm just going to reduce this a bit to make it a bit clearer what we're looking at. Bring this here into the middle. Okay, actually I'll make it a little bit smaller. There we go. Okay, so in terms of which order you do these in, it's not very clear, and it's hard for me to say because it really depends on what you want to get on your class. You know, whether you're focusing on a particular element and then you want to go with like the damage skills of that element and that kind of stuff. However, there are definitely certain ones which bring a lot to the particular skills that they are there for, as well as ones which you may want to get early on. So these are 5 Skuruns I've highlighted as ones which you probably want to look at earlier on when you start the game, or you know, if you haven't got these yet, you know, if you've been doing other ones and you haven't actually completed any of these 5, then you know, maybe you want to put some consideration towards them. So the first one, they're roughly in order as well. So the first one, Nature Drake, I would say Drake is just a very important skill for damage for all newer players, as Nature Drake is going to buff the damage from Drake so much that I'd say it's probably the first Skurun you want to do. And you do kind of want to take these Skuruns to max as well, rather than like boosting them all up a little bit. But anyway, so Nature Drake is probably the first one I'd recommend. Then you got Meteor Strike. So I don't know how available this is going to be right now. It's not super available, but Arcane Beam is just a really good damage skill, and Meteor Strike is going to massively improve that damage. Especially the access to fire is quite easy earlier on, so you know, Meteor Strike can be a really good damage skill there. Flame Breath, this skill is basically useless. So Arcane Breath is basically useless without the Flame Breath Skurun in it. So this kind of adds a new skill onto your class. It's going to do a lot, and again, if you focus on fire early on, this is going to be a brilliant boost to your class, to your character. Empowered Frozen Sphere, this is just brilliant for utility, the slowing the enemies and that kind of stuff. So having this is going to be great quite early on. Then you've got Healing Fountain Rune. I kind of slapped this in because it does such a boost to the skill. It triples the healing speed, it doubles it in PvP. It just makes the skill actually usable and good. Similar to Arcane Breath, except Healing Fountain is kind of less of an important skill compared to something like Flame Breath. So that's going through which ones you'd maybe want to do first. What we're going to talk about now, and the last point of this video, is showing a breakdown of the different elements. So I mentioned earlier on about which elements are the best on Wizard, and which ones are kind of less good. What we're looking at here is actually my suggestion to Rumble for future Skuruns and where they should focus on, you know, which elements putting on which things. So if you just take a second, I'm gonna go ahead and read. I need to blow my nose. I said earlier on that I've got a sore throat. I think I've got a cold coming on. So if you've been reading this through the last few seconds, what we're looking at here is the primary damage dealers and then the secondary damage dealers. This is as I broke them down in my previous video. However, I'm excluding the minor damage dealers because they're not going to be important. And also I'm excluding 2 things from the secondary damage dealers. One of them is Drake, because it doesn't actually use your elemental stats at all. So I just kind of excluded it here because it's irrelevant to what kind of build you're creating, you know, because this is all about if someone creates a certain build, whether or not they're actually not viable compared to someone who's created a different build. And I wanted to say to I wanted to say to Rumble, like, look, okay, we should kind of make each of the different elements viable, so that people can choose which build they're creating, rather than it being like one really obvious choice kind of thing. So anyway, Drake's not included there. Also, Arcane Blast is not included in there because there just isn't that great. The Skuruns aren't very important yet, so it's not being included yet. So anyway, what we're looking at here is primary damage skills, secondary damage skills, and which elemental Skuruns are there for them already that are actually only the good ones. I'm only including the good ones. So if you find this confusing that I'm listing Fire, Shadow, and Light for Arcane Beam, when earlier on I was saying that any element is viable, actually the water and the water and nature ones, they're much worse than the others. They're not really that good. You can use them if you're creating a water or nature build. You know, they can kind of be good, but like ultimately these ones are way better than the water and nature. So anyway, putting this together is a bit hard, maybe, you know, in your head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through each element in turn and talking about what it has, what it's missing and stuff. So the first one to look at is fire, and clearly, yeah, sorry, no, I was reading below there and getting confused. Clearly, fire is the best, the most established element. It's got each of these secondary damage dealers, which they're actually kind of the classic skills that you can spam off and use in combat. So it's got all three of those, and then of the primary damage dealers, it's got 3 out of 4. The only one it's missing is polymorph, and that means that fire is basically a very solid element that you can pick, and you're missing almost nothing. In fact, Arcane Breath only has a fire skill rune, so if you pick anything other than fire, you're going to be missing out on one of these very important skills anyway. So fire is almost crucial to have in your build, and it's a good thing that there are fire jewels available in the shop for everyone, because otherwise I think people would be pretty pissed off that there are, like, fire kind of gives you everything, and if it wasn't available, there would be a problem. But anyway, so fire gives you everything. It actually gives you some very, very solid skill runes. It gives you the best arcane beam one, obviously this exclusive one, and then yeah, just solid ones across these. So polymorph, missing out on this is a bit of a problem, but basically what that means is if you go with fire, you kind of need to go with either nature or shadow to have this. Nature or shadow is a supportive element, and then you'll have everything. So that's why I say fire and nature is basically the best. So the next one I'm going to go through is water. So water is a bit of a weird one. It's got all these secondary damage dealers, and it's got very solid options in those actually. But then it's got no primary damage dealers at all. This is a very big problem. If you go with water builds, you're going to be struggling. And one of the main reasons why this is because Master of Ice came to the game, and it made water just way better than the other elements. So then they kind of went with the other elements, and they brought out screens for those, and they revamped Protection Bubble and Polymorph. Previously, these weren't damage skills that were very good, as well as even Arcane Breath actually. Before Flame Breath came along, this was just useless as well, and it's one of the things of like trying to make wizards good for damaging, because they were not good at all. So anyway, basically, because water runes came out a long time ago, they came out for the different skills that then they came out in a setting where wizards didn't do that great damage output anyway. So we got water runes, the skills which then now aren't necessarily the best and stuff, and water's lacking a bit. Well, I say a bit, it's missing all these ones. There is a water rune for Arcane Beam, but it's no good at all. It's a lot weaker than the others. And then yeah, there's no water rune at all for the others. So yeah, it's a big problem. However, it is worth saying that Empowered Frozen Sphere and Icicle Splash are great water options. And if you have Master of Ice on your character, which you're going to anyway because it's the only skill rune for Archmage, then you've still got that there with Master of Ice and Empowered Frozen Sphere to do some good water damage. That's always a very good choice. So anyway, that's what's happening with water. Then moving on to nature. So nature, you might be wondering, looking at this, why I say nature's so good. And the reason is because nature pretty much has the best skill runes where it's placed. So across these 3 skills, nature's just very, very solid. I said it's the best Mana Storm, it's joint best Mana Bolts. Arcane Ball, I didn't really mention it, but it's got the best damage skill rune there. Other than Empowered Frozen Sphere, which it has a lot of utility added in, but in terms of damage, actually the nature one's pretty good there. Then we've got obviously it's missing Arcane Breath. It's also missing Protection Bubble, which is those two. It's a bit of a problem that it's missing both of those two, and ultimately that's why it is missing. It's not as well established as fire, but for Polymorph, it's got that one there, which is very important. And then Arcane Beam, it has got a skill rune, it's pretty bad. So yeah, nature is brilliant across the board, apart from then the few gaps that it's missing. Sorry, I say across the board. It's brilliant at what it does, but there are some gaps. And those gaps can be filled by fire very nicely, or actually even shadow really, but even then you're missing out on Arcane Breath. So yeah, nature's up there, and I'd say it's the second best. If you can have fire and nature, then actually it's kind of better to have nature higher, just because the skill runes for nature are generally a bit stronger. But anyway, that's how it is. The next one I'm going to go through is light. Now, light is sorely missing Skurunes. It is the worst. It's the worst element on every single class. It just hasn't had Skurunes developed for it properly. We've barely had any elemental jewels for light. They've just kind of they kind of set it to the side. They worked on shadow a bit, but they didn't really progress light. So it's got Arcane Ball, but the Skurunes, it hasn't got a single Skurun for Mana Storm. For Mana Bolts, it's got a really bad Skurun. So it's doing poorly there on the secondary damage dealers. And then on the primary ones, Arcane Breath, it hasn't got a Skurun. Protection Bubble, it does have a Skurun, which used to be really good, but then they nerfed it massively when they kind of changed how the skill worked. So yeah, that's practically useless. It's terrible in PvP, and it's just not any good anymore in PvE. So that doesn't really count. Polymorph, there's no Skurun at all. And then Arcane Beam is the only place where it stands out. So I actually really wanted to have light in my build. I wanted to be fire light a long time ago, because there was a time when the Protection Bubble rune was really strong, and the Arcane Beam one, before Meteor Strike came out, Radiant Light was way stronger than the others. And I was thinking, oh, this is really cool, because, you know, we've got a good Protection Bubble rune, we've got the best Arcane Beam, which Arcane Beam was like the only really good damage skill back then. And then also, well, the Arcane Ball didn't exist, but, you know, I was feeling like, okay, cool, like, you know, if I work up my light, I'm going to have a couple of key bits which, like, put me ahead of other people. But then nothing more came. So light is just absolutely terrible, unfortunately. It hasn't really got anything going for it, and do not pick light build right now. So now moving on to Shadow. Shadow is a very interesting one, because it doesn't have a single secondary damage dealer thing. So Mana Storm, the Skurun for it is just terrible. Mana Bolts, the Skurun for it is just terrible. Arcane Ball, again, Skurun's just terrible. They're like really old Skuruns that just don't do that much at all. And then you move to the primary damage dealers, and you have three of the best Skuruns on these skills. So, you know, this one's joint best in Polymorph. This one's joint best for Protection Bubble. And then you've got Arcane Beam. This one's a little bit weaker than the Fire and the Light one, but it's got Silence. So in PvP, this is actually pretty damn good. So you're missing Arcane Breath like every other element, other than Fire. So there's definite gaps, and then also, you know, all these. But if you picked any of these other three elements as, you know, your other element that you're kind of working on, then Shadow's actually pretty decent. It's worth noting as well, it's not included in here, but the Refract skill does have one Skurun right now, which is a Shadow Skurun. Now that Shadow Skurun is a bit weird. It's bugged right now, so it's reducing the damage it deals with the base damage. So if you don't have a Shadow build, it's better to use it without the Skurun in. However, if you do have a Shadow build, then it's better to use with the Skurun in, and that becomes a really strong source of Shadow damage actually. So that's an extra bonus here which I haven't mentioned. But Shadow, yeah, it's got some really good stuff going for it. But unfortunately, I do think like it's a bit kind of outclassed by Fire, just because you've got that Arcane Breath, and Polymorph can be done with Nature instead of Shadow. So Shadow can be a good supporting element, but it's kind of, you know, used in tandem with other things. I kind of wanted to mention earlier on how Shadow and Water are strangely a really good combo, because you've got these secondary damage dealers all good in Water. You've got Master of Ice as well, which can make Water really kind of solid, as long as you've got the gaps filled, which Shadow fills those gaps. So you're missing this Flame Breath here, but other than that, actually, it's very solid kind of combination there. So I hope that gives you an idea of all that's going on with the different elements on the Wizard class right now, and you can see here what I'm recommending and where I hope it will get to. So yeah, they tend to kind of follow what I suggest when it comes to these things, especially Wizard, because they trust me with Wizard a lot. I play Wizard class more than I do the other two classes, so they'll look at this and they go, okay, you know what, actually I can see where he's going with this. I think we'll do something similar to that. So sometimes it does come out completely different to what I suggest, but most of the time I'd say about, you know, half of what I'm showing here I will expect to come into fruition when they add more Skuruns to the game. So you can see some kind of future here. This is actually a section of the forum which is not visible normally. I've got it hidden only for moderators and the developers, so they can have a look at it and, you know, take from it without me. Without other people coming in and throwing in opinions and stuff and making things more complicated. But anyway, so that's everything in this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you now know what you're going to do with Skuruns. and which ones are the good ones, and all that kind of stuff. I've given absolutely everything I could say in this video, and I hope it's made you all very satisfied. So thanks very much for watching. That is it for all the wizard videos. Next will be coming. The next set of videos that will be coming are the archer videos. I'm going to go through archer exactly the same, going through the skills, then talking through builds and setups, then skill runes, and then skill runes. I don't know what I said there. And then I'm going to be going in through the knight in exactly the same way. So if you play those two classes and you've been waiting for those videos, don't worry, they're on their way. And if you watched all this video, what are you doing? Because you don't play wizard class. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.